I'm Cassandra Miller, 27 years old, and I never thought my own sister would try to kill me. Growing up in our family home near the Mississippi River in rural Louisiana, Heather and I had our differences, but what happened during that historic flood last year still haunts my nightmares. When the waters began rising and everyone was evacuating, my sister Heather locked me in our basement and left me to drown. What the rescue team discovered when they pulled me out was something my sister had been desperately trying to hide for years. If you're watching this from somewhere safe and dry, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're watching from in the comments below as I share the darkest betrayal of my life. Heather was always the dominant one in our relationship. 3 years older than me. She established early on that she was in charge. When we were little, this dynamic seemed normal. Just typical sibling hierarchy. She'd decide which games we'd play, which TV shows we'd watch, and even which friends I could have. At the time, I thought that's just how older sisters were supposed to behave. Our mother, Barbara, worked 2 nursing jobs to keep food on the table, especially after our father died when I was 12. Dad's passing hit our family hard, but it affected Heather in ways that weren't immediately apparent. She became more controlling, more desperate to establish her dominance in every situation. Looking back, I realized that's when things began to truly deteriorate between us. I still remember the science fair in 8th grade. I'd worked for months on a project about water pollution in the Mississippi Delta. The night before the fair, I found my display board mysteriously damaged, forcing me to stay up all night recreating it. I placed second, while Heather's hastily assembled volcano won first. It wasn't until years later that my former classmate Bailey told me Heather had convinced the judges I had cheated by having our mother help me. High school brought more of the same. When I was accepted into the National Honor Society, Heather told everyone it was only because the faculty felt sorry for me after Dad died. When I got the lead in the school play, my costume mysteriously disappeared hours before opening night. When Jason Harrison asked me to prom, the same Jason that Heather had been interested in, she spread rumors that I had pursued him aggressively, knowing how she felt. "You always get everything handed to you," she'd say with such conviction that sometimes I wondered if it was true. Despite her efforts, I managed to maintain good grades and a small circle of loyal friends. When I received a scholarship to study environmental science at the University of California, I saw my escape route and took it without hesitation. California was like breathing fresh air after years underwater. 3,000 miles of distance gave me perspective on just how toxic our relationship had been. I made new friends, excelled in my classes, and eventually landed a job with an environmental consulting firm in San Francisco. I built a life that was entirely my own, free from Heather's shadow. Still, guilt followed me westward. Mother's voice on our weekly calls grew more tired, more strained. "Heather's still here taking care of things," she'd say, the implication clear. While I was building my career and enjoying the California sunshine, my sister had remained in Louisiana, working at the local pharmacy and living at home to help Mom. Each holiday, each missed birthday added another brick to my wall of guilt. I sent money home regularly, called every Sunday, and visited once a year for Christmas, brief, tense visits where Heather would parade her sacrifice before me like a martyr. "Some of us care about family more than careers," she'd say while passing the potatoes. I'd bite my tongue, reminding myself it was only for a few days. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday in March when my mother phoned outside our regular schedule. "The doctor found something," she said, her voice small. "Cancer. Stage 3. The world tilted beneath me. "I'm coming home," I said instantly. "Heather says she can handle it," Mom replied. "I'm coming home," I repeated. Some obligations transcend even the most complicated relationships. By the end of the week, I had taken a leave of absence from my job and booked a one-way ticket to Louisiana. I told myself it would be different this time. We were adults now. Surely Heather and I could put aside our differences for Mom's sake. As the plane descended toward the swampy Louisiana landscape, I had no idea that I was flying straight into a trap 8 years in the making. The air hit me like a wet blanket when I stepped off the plane in New Orleans. Louisiana in April, already sticky with humidity, the scent of magnolias and gasoline hanging thick in the air. I rented a car and drove the familiar route to our hometown of St. Elaine, watching as urban sprawl gave way to marshland and then the scattered houses of rural communities built stubbornly in floodplains. Our family home sat on a slight rise above the road, a white two-story with green shutters that had seen better days. The porch sagged slightly, and the garden Mom had once tended so carefully was now overrun with weeds. A newer model Chevrolet sat in the driveway, obviously not Mom's ancient Toyota. Heather opened the door before I could knock. At 30. She looked older than her years, her blonde hair shorter than I remembered, with premature lines around her eyes. She wore scrubs with the logo of Riverside Pharmacy, where she worked as a technician. "So you finally decided to grace us with your presence," she said, not moving from the doorway. "Hello to you too, Heather," I replied, swallowing my irritation. "How's Mom?" "Resting. Chemo takes a lot out of her." She finally stepped aside to let me in. The interior of the house felt different somehow. The familiar family photos still lined the hallway, but new. Heavy deadbolts had been installed on several doors. The basement door, previously secured with just a simple knob lock, now featured an impressive deadbolt and what looked like a reinforced frame. "Did we get robbed or something?" I asked, gesturing toward the new security features. Heather's expression tightened. "Crime's gotten worse around here," Greg insisted. "Greg," as if summoned. A tall man with close-cropped hair appeared from the kitchen. "You must be the famous Cassie," he said, extending a hand. His grip was too tight, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Greg Chandler. I've heard all about you." "Funny, I've heard nothing about you," I replied, looking questioningly at Heather. "We got married last year," Heather said flatly. "Small ceremony. Mom wasn't feeling well, and we knew you were too busy to come anyway." The passive-aggressive barb landed exactly as intended. Before I could respond, a thin voice called from upstairs. "Is that Cassie? Is my girl home?" Mom's appearance shocked me. She'd always been slender, but now she was skeletal, her skin ashy gray. Her once vibrant auburn hair I'd inherited, was completely gone, replaced by a floral scarf wrapped around her head. I hugged her gently, afraid she might break. "You didn't need to come all this way," she said, but clutched my hand tightly. "Of course I did. I'm staying until you're better." Over Mom's shoulder. I caught Heather and Greg exchanging a look I couldn't interpret. Dinner that evening was a tense affair. Greg dominated the conversation, talking about his job as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical company, traveling throughout the Southeast. Heather watched him with an admiration that seemed excessive, laughing too loudly at his jokes and deferring to him on every topic. Mom barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate. When I asked about her treatment plan, Heather quickly interrupted. "We've got it all handled. Dr. Marshall has been amazing, and the special medication Greg has access to through his pharmaceutical connections has been helping reduce the side effects." "Special medication?" I asked. "Nothing for you to worry about," Greg said smoothly. "Industry connections have their benefits." After dinner, I offered to help Mom to her room, but Heather insisted that was her job. When I tried to follow, Greg deftly steered me toward the kitchen to help with dishes. "Heather has a system," he explained. "Best not to disrupt the routine." Later, exploring the house while Heather and Greg watched television, I noticed other changes. Mom's jewelry box, which had contained her modest but cherished collection, including Grandma's pearl necklace, sat empty on her dresser. The antique silver that had been a wedding gift to my parents was missing from the dining room cabinet. "We had to sell some things for medical expenses," Heather explained when I asked the next day. "Insurance doesn't cover everything." That made sense, but something felt off. I remembered Mom mentioning on the phone that her insurance through the hospital where she'd worked for 20 years was excellent. When I tried to bring this up, Heather changed the subject. Over the next few days, I tried to establish a connection with Mom, but Heather was always there, hovering, interrupting, controlling the conversation. When I suggested taking Mom to her next chemo appointment, Heather insisted it was unnecessary. "You'd just be in the way," she said. Besides, you don't know how she reacts to treatment. Sometimes it's not pretty. In Mom's room, I noticed a stack of financial documents on her nightstand. While she napped, I glanced through them, bank statements showing large withdrawals, mortgage refinancing papers, and what looked like new life insurance policies. When Mom woke and saw me looking, a flash of fear crossed her face. "Don't tell Heather," she whispered. "She doesn't like me to worry about the money." The basement remained a forbidden zone. When I mentioned needing to get some old photo albums stored down there, Heather tensed visibly. "I'll get them later," she said. "The stairs are dangerous and Greg keeps his work stuff down there. He's very particular about his privacy." One evening, coming back early from a grocery run, I overheard Heather and Greg arguing in the kitchen. "She's asking too many questions," Heather hissed. "I told you this was a bad idea." "Relax," Greg replied. "She has no reason to suspect anything. Just keep her away from the basement and make sure your mother doesn't say anything. We're too close to finishing this." I slipped back outside, my heart pounding. Whatever they were hiding, I needed to find out what it was, especially if it involved Mom. My opportunity came 3 days later. Heather mentioned they needed to drive to Baton Rouge for some special medication for Mom. They'd be gone most of the day. "Mom's resting. Don't disturb her unless absolutely necessary," Heather instructed as they left. "And don't go poking around. The house is old and there are safety hazards you don't know about." I waited until their car disappeared down the road before springing into action. First, I checked on Mom, who was sleeping soundly, too soundly. The array of pill bottles on her nightstand concerned me. I recognized some as standard cancer treatments, but others had labels from pharmacies I'd never heard of, with names that seemed slightly off from standard medications. The basement key was my next objective. I remembered from childhood that Mom always kept a spare keyring in her sewing basket. After searching through several drawers, I found the basket tucked in the back of her closet. The spare keys were still there, including one that looked newer than the others. The other side used for storage and laundry. What I found instead was unrecognizable. The family room area had been converted into what looked like a makeshift laboratory. Folding tables lined the walls, holding pill presses, powder-filled containers labeled with pharmaceutical names, digital scales, and packaging materials. A professional label maker sat next to stacks of convincing-looking prescription bottles and boxes. On another table, I found documents, dozens of them. Forged prescriptions, falsified medical records, and shipping labels to addresses all over the state. With growing horror, I realized what I was seeing. Heather and Greg were running a counterfeit medication operation. I took pictures of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. Then I began examining the documents more carefully, looking for anything related to Mom. In a locked file cabinet, which opened with another key from the ring, I found what I was looking for. A folder labeled Barbara Miller contained falsified medical records showing a cancer diagnosis, but also financial documents that made my blood run cold, life insurance policies listing Heather as the sole beneficiary, power of attorney documents with signatures that didn't quite match Mom's handwriting, and bank transfer records showing Mom's retirement accounts being systematically drained. Worse still, I found medication logs detailing what they were giving her, not cancer treatments, but carefully calibrated doses of drugs that would mimic cancer symptoms while slowly poisoning her. They were killing her for the insurance money, using her as a test case for their counterfeit medications. The realization hit me with physical force, making me stagger against the wall. My sister wasn't caring for our dying mother, she was murdering her. I needed to gather evidence and get Mom out of here. I started taking more pictures, downloading bank statements, and collecting sample pills to turn over to authorities. So focused was I on this task that I didn't hear the basement door open. "I knew you couldn't mind your own business." Heather's voice from the top of the stairs froze me in place. "You never could." She descended slowly, Greg right behind her. I clutched my phone behind my back, quickly hitting send on a text message with the photos attached to my own email address. "What is all this?" I demanded, trying to sound more confused than accusatory, buying time for my phone to finish sending. Why do you have a pill manufacturing operation in our basement? It's not what it looks like, Greg said smoothly. Really? Because it looks like you're making counterfeit drugs and slowly poisoning Mom to death for her insurance money. The message sent with a soft ping I prayed they didn't hear. Heather's face hardened into something unrecognizable. You always think you're so smart, don't you, Cassie? Always the perfect daughter. The college graduate. The successful one. This isn't about me, I said, edging toward the stairs. This is about what you're doing to Mom. Mom's fine with the arrangement, Heather said, blocking my path. She signed the papers. Those signatures are forged. And I doubt she agreed to being poisoned. Greg stepped forward. Your sister's right about one thing. You really should have minded your own business. I lunged for the stairs, but Greg was faster, grabbing my arm and twisting until I dropped my phone. It clattered down the wooden steps as Heather retrieved it with a triumphant smile. Password protected, I said. And the evidence is already sent. The slap came without warning, Heather's hand connecting with my cheek with enough force to make me see stars. Always so smug. She hissed. You have no idea what I've had to do, the life I've had to live while you were off playing environmental savior in California. So this is revenge? Killing Mom because you're jealous of me. This is survival, she spat. Some of us weren't handed full scholarships and perfect lives. Some of us had to stay behind and watch everything fall apart. While she ranted, I gauged the distance to the basement storage room, the one place I might be able to barricade myself and call for help using the old landline I knew was still there. You think I wanted to stay in this dead-end town? Heather continued. You think I enjoyed watching Mom work herself to death to send you money for your fancy education? Mom sent me money twice in 8 years, I said, inching sideways. I worked 2 jobs through college. What are you talking about? Heather laughed bitterly. Of course she'd tell you that. Perfect Cassie mustn't know about family financial troubles. But did you know Dad left an insurance policy? $50,000. Guess who got it all? I never got any insurance money, I said. Genuinely confused. That's because Mom used it for your college fund, Heather snarled. Not a penny for me, but everything for precious Cassie's future. I hadn't known. Mom had always said my scholarship covered everything. Before I could process this revelation, I made my move, sprinting toward the storage room. I almost made it. Greg's tackle sent us both crashing into a shelving unit. Tools and old paint cans rained down, one hitting my forehead with enough force to daze me momentarily. Through blurred vision, I saw Heather approaching with a syringe. Just a little something to keep you quiet while we decide what to do with you, she said, her voice eerily calm. We can't have you ruining everything now. I fought, but Greg's weight pinned me down as Heather plunged the needle into my arm. The effect was almost immediate, not unconsciousness, but a heavy paralysis that made my limbs feel like lead. They dragged me into the storage room, propping me against the wall. Through the chemical fog, I heard snippets of their hurried conversation. Have to move everything tonight. Make it look like she never came. Flood warnings all over the news. The door slammed shut, followed by the definitive click of a lock engaging. As the drug pulled me under, the last thing I heard was a weather alert blaring from upstairs and the sound of water beginning to seep under the door. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, my head throbbed and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. The storage room was pitch black except for a thin line of light under the door. I tried to stand but swayed dangerously, my limbs still heavy from whatever drug Heather had injected. Outside the room, I could hear frantic activity, boxes being moved, drawers slamming, urgent voices. Crawling to the door, I pressed my ear against it. The river's already breached the levee south of town, Greg was saying. We need to get this stuff out now. What about her? Heather asked. There was no doubt who her was. Leave her. By the time anyone finds her, there won't be any evidence left. They'll think she got trapped during the evacuation. And Mom, she's coming with us. Obviously. We've invested too much time in this. Once we're settled somewhere else, we finish the plan. The insurance pays out, and we're set. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only were they planning to leave me to die, but they intended to continue their slow murder of our mother. I had to get out. The storage room had one small, high window that provided ventilation but was too small for escape. I fumbled in the darkness, searching for anything I could use as a tool or weapon. My hand closed around what felt like a hammer. Not much against a flood, but better than nothing. I pounded on the door. Heather, you can't do this. Think about what you're doing. The basement fell silent, then footsteps approached. The door opened a crack, and Heather peered in, her face illuminated by the flashlight she held. You're awake. That's unfortunate, she said coolly. I'd hoped you'd sleep through it. Through my own drowning? I struggled to keep my voice steady. Is that really what you want? To kill your own sister? Something flickered across her face, doubt, perhaps. Or a remnant of the sister I once knew. You brought this on yourself, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You could have stayed in California. You could have minded your own business. Mom is my business, I said. She's your mother too, Heather. How can you do this to her? Her expression hardened. You have no idea what I've been through. No idea what it's like to be the one left behind, the one who wasn't special enough to escape. Dad's insurance money was supposed to be for both of us, but Mom spent it all on you. I never knew about any insurance money, I repeated. And I worked my way through college. Nothing was handed to me. Liar, she spat. You always lie. Always the innocent one. While I'm the villain. Well, now I'm embracing the role. She began to close the door. Wait. I lunged forward, trying to push past her, but she shoved me back with surprising strength. Don't worry, it'll be quick once the water rises, she said. Quicker than what we had planned for you originally. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking with finality. What did you do with Mom? I screamed through the door. Where is she? Sleeping soundly in the car, Greg's voice answered. Don't worry, we take good care of her. People will know. I shouted. I sent the evidence. They'll come looking for me. In this flood? Good luck with that, Heather replied. The whole parish is evacuating. By the time anyone thinks about checking basements, it'll be too late. I heard them moving away, ignoring my continued shouts. Minutes later, the sound of a car engine starting, then fading into the distance. They were gone. I was alone. As if on cue, I heard a new sound, water trickling, then flowing more steadily. The storm drains must have backed up. The basement was beginning to flood. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to think rationally. The storage room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with concrete walls, a solid wooden door, and that one tiny window near the ceiling. The room contained old holiday decorations, tools, broken furniture, and boxes of family mementos Heather apparently hadn't considered worth selling. The water was ankle-deep already and rising faster than I expected. My phone was gone, taken by Heather. The landline I'd remembered was outside in the main basement area. I was trapped, with the water steadily climbing. I tried the door again, throwing my body against it repeatedly, but it held firm. The lock was solid, the hinges on the outside. The hammer I'd found helped me remove the screws from the inside knob, but the deadbolt remained secured. Outside, the storm raged. Through the tiny window, I could see rain falling in sheets, illuminated occasionally by flashes of lightning. The thunder was so loud it shook the foundation of the house. And all the while, the water continued to rise. By midnight, it had reached my waist. I'd managed to stack several boxes and a broken table to create a makeshift platform, buying myself a few more hours. The ceiling was solid concrete, no escape that way. The window was my only hope, but it was small and set high in the wall. As I stood on my precarious platform, the water now chest-high when I stepped off it, a terrible realization hit me. Heather had really done it. She had left me here to die. The remnants of the counterfeit drug operation. The storm continued unabated, water pouring in faster than I could have imagined. By dawn, I was perched on the highest point of my makeshift platform, the water up to my shoulders when standing on it. The reality of drowning became increasingly concrete. I thought about Mom, wondering if she was still alive. If Heather and Greg had continued their journey or if they too had been caught in the flood. I thought about the life I'd built in California. How no one there knew where I was or what had happened to me. I might simply disappear, another unnamed victim of the historic flood. As the water rose to my chin, I made one final, desperate attempt. Using a length of pipe I'd salvaged from a broken shelf, I smashed at the small window until the glass shattered. The opening was still too small for me to fit through. But as I pushed my face toward it, I gulped the fresh air gratefully. Then I began to scream. I screamed until my voice gave out, then took another breath and screamed again. In the flooded parish. With most residents evacuated, who would hear me? But I had to try. The water kept rising. Soon I'd have to swim, and eventually exhaustion would claim me. Help! I called through the broken window, my voice now a ragged whisper. Please, someone help me. As if in answer, I heard the distant sound of a motor. Probably just debris carried by the floodwater, I thought. But it grew louder, more directional. A boat? Someone was out there. With renewed energy, I called again, waving the pipe through the broken window to create movement that might catch attention. Here. I'm trapped in here. The motor sound changed pitch, turning toward the house. I could hardly believe it when a voice called back. Hello? Is someone there? Here. I cried, my voice breaking. In the basement. I'm trapped. The next few minutes were a blur. The boat maneuvered closer, and a flashlight beam swept across the basement window. I caught a glimpse of official rescue gear. Ma'am, this is the St. Elaine Fire and Rescue, a man's voice called. We're going to get you out of there. Hold tight. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to believe I might survive. The water continued rising even as my rescuers worked to free me. What had been chest-deep when they arrived soon reached my neck, forcing me to tilt my head back to keep my face above water. The makeshift platform I'd built was now completely submerged, leaving me treading water in the rapidly filling room. We're working as fast as we can, ma'am, called one of the rescuers, Derek Sullivan according to the name on his uniform. The window's too small for extraction. We're going to have to break through the wall. Please hurry, I gasped, spitting out water that had splashed into my mouth. I don't know how much longer I can stay afloat. The physical exhaustion was becoming overwhelming. Hours of standing on my precarious platform had left my legs cramping painfully. The drug Heather had injected still lingered in my system, making my movements sluggish. The cold water sapped my body heat, leaving me shivering uncontrollably. Can you tell us your name? The second rescuer called through the window. His uniform identified him as Travis Wilson. Cassandra Miller, I managed. My sister locked me in here before evacuating. There was a pause. Locked you in? Intentionally? Yes, I said, water lapping at my chin now. She and her husband were running a counterfeit drug operation. I found out, and they left me to drown. I heard them conferring outside, their voices urgent but words indistinguishable over the sound of rain and rushing water. Then the whine of a power tool pierced the air, and the concrete wall beside the window began to vibrate. We're cutting through, Derek called. Just a few more minutes. Try to find something floating that can help you stay above water. I groped around in the murky water, fingers closing around what felt like a plastic storage bin. Not ideal, but it provided some buoyancy as I clung to it with increasingly numb hands. The water reached the ceiling in patches, leaving only small pockets of air. I had to tilt my head at an awkward angle, pressing my face against the ceiling to breathe. Each breath brought me closer to the concrete above as the water inexorably rose. Outside, the rescue team worked frantically. The sound of the power tool was joined by the crack of a sledgehammer. Small chunks of concrete began falling into the water around me. Almost through, Travis called. Stay with us, Cassandra. The air pockets were disappearing quickly. Soon there would be no space left between the water and ceiling. In that moment, facing what felt like certain death, a strange calm came over me. I thought of Mom, hoping she would somehow survive whatever Heather had planned. I thought of the life I'd built, the places I'd never see again, the things I'd left unsaid. A final massive blow from the sledgehammer created a hole in the wall large enough for a human body. Light spilled into the storage room as Derek called through the opening. Cassandra, swim toward the light. With the last of my strength, I pushed off from the wall and swam toward the opening. The current created by the inflowing water made it difficult, pulling me back into the room. My lungs burned as I held my breath, the ceiling now completely submerged. A strong arm reached through the hole, groping blindly in the water. I stretched toward it, our fingers brushing once, twice, before finally connecting. The grip was iron, pulling me forcefully toward the opening. I barely fit, the rough concrete scraping my shoulders and hips as I was dragged through. I emerged into blinding daylight, gasping and choking, pulled immediately into the rescue boat. Someone wrapped a thermal blanket around my shoulders as I coughed up water. "You're safe now," Derek said, his hand steady on my shoulder. "We've got you." Through tear-blurred eyes, I saw that our boat was floating level with what had been the first-floor windows of our family home. The entire neighborhood was submerged, with only rooftops and second stories visible above the vast expanse of muddy water. The rain continued falling, though less intensely than during the night. "My mother," I gasped between coughs. "They took her. They're poisoning her." The rescuers exchanged glances. "Let's get you to the emergency shelter first," Travis said. "You can tell the authorities everything there." As we motored away from what remained of my childhood home, I watched the floodwaters swallow the last visible parts of the basement where I'd nearly died. The evidence of Heather and Greg's operation was underwater now, perhaps destroyed forever. But I was alive. And as long as I was alive, I would fight to save Mom and bring my sister to justice for what she'd done. The emergency shelter had been set up in the high school gymnasium on the highest ground in the parish. Cots lined the basketball court, occupied by shell-shocked residents who had lost everything to the flood. Medical personnel moved among them, treating injuries and dispensing medications. As soon as we arrived, I was whisked to a medical station where a doctor examined me for injuries and hypothermia. "You're lucky," Dr. Samuel Jenkins said as he shined a light into my eyes. Another hour in that water, and we'd be having a very different conversation. "I need to talk to the police," I insisted, trying to sit up. "My mother is in danger." "First things first," he said firmly, pushing me back onto the cot. "You're showing signs of mild hypothermia and possible concussion, not to mention whatever drug is still in your system." "My sister injected me with something," I explained, to keep me quiet when I discovered what they were doing. Dr. Jenkins frowned. "We'll take a blood sample. In the meantime, rest. I'll have someone from the sheriff's department come speak with you." Despite my protests, my body betrayed me. The combination of physical exhaustion, stress, and lingering effects of the drug pulled me toward unconsciousness. The last thing I remembered was the doctor hanging in 4-bag beside my cot and the warm sensation of fluids entering my veins. When I woke, the gymnasium was quieter. Night had fallen again, the space dimly lit to allow people to sleep. A deputy sat on a folding chair beside my cot, writing in a notebook. She looked up when she noticed I was awake. "Ms. Miller? I'm Detective Laura Patterson with the St. Elaine Sheriff's Department. Feeling up to answering some questions?" I struggled to sit up, my muscles screaming in protest. "My mother. We've issued a bolo for your sister, her husband, and your mother," she assured me. "Every law enforcement agency in Louisiana and neighboring states has their description and vehicle information." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by renewed anxiety. "You have to understand, they're poisoning her, making her think she has cancer so they can collect insurance money. She needs medical attention." Detective Patterson nodded, her expression grim. "The rescuers who found you reported your allegations. I need you to tell me everything from the beginning." For the next hour, I recounted everything: my return to Louisiana, the strange behavior, the discovery in the basement, the confrontation with Heather, and their plan to finish killing Mom somewhere else after the flood. I sent evidence to my email, I explained. Pictures of their operation, the forged documents, everything. "But my phone is gone, Heather took it." The detective produced a tablet. "Can you access your email from here?" With trembling fingers, I logged into my account. There they were, the photos I'd managed to send before being caught. Detective Patterson's expression grew increasingly serious as she swiped through them. "This is extensive," she said finally. Your sister and her husband have apparently been operating a significant counterfeit pharmaceutical operation. These aren't just fake cancer drugs, they're producing everything from antibiotics to opioids. The cancer drugs were specifically for Mom, I explained. They've been slowly poisoning her, making her think she's undergoing chemotherapy. That's why she looks so sick. The detective nodded. We'll need to get these to our cybercrime unit right away. In the meantime, she was interrupted by her radio crackling to life. Patterson, come in. She stepped away to respond, speaking in low tones. When she returned, her expression had changed. They've found your sister's vehicle. The abandoned Chevrolet was discovered at a gas station just across the Texas border. Security footage showed Heather and Greg switching to another vehicle, a van with Texas plates reported stolen the previous day. There was no sign of my mother. They must have realized we'd be looking for them, Detective Patterson explained as we sat in a makeshift command center established in the high school principal's office. 3 days had passed since my rescue, and while the floodwaters had begun to recede, much of St. Elaine remained underwater. What about Mom? I asked. The question that had been consuming me since I regained consciousness. We're still looking, she said, her tone gentle but direct. The good news is we found prescription bottles in the abandoned car that matched the counterfeit medications you photographed. The lab is analyzing them now to determine exactly what they contain. I nodded numbly. The wait was excruciating, each hour that passed potentially bringing Mom closer to death if she wasn't already gone. We've also been able to access your sister's financial records based on the documents you provided, Detective Patterson continued. The insurance policies are real, 3 different companies, with payouts totaling nearly $2 million, all listing Heather as the sole beneficiary. She said something about Dad's insurance money, I said. The memory surfacing through the fog of trauma. She claimed Mom used it all for my college fund. The detective made a note. We'll look into that. In the meantime, we've expanded the search to include hospitals in eastern Texas. If your mother's condition has deteriorated, they might seek medical attention while claiming the symptoms are related to cancer. It was a slim hope, but I clung to it desperately. By the 5th day after the flood, I had been moved from the emergency shelter to a hotel in Baton Rouge, where I continued to work with law enforcement. The FBI had joined the investigation due to the interstate nature of the crimes and the extensive counterfeit drug operation. I was sitting in my hotel room, picking at a room service salad I had no appetite for, when my phone rang, a replacement provided by the Victim Services Coordinator. Cassandra? It's Detective Patterson. We found her. My heart stopped. Is she? She's alive. A hospital in Houston contacted us after seeing the alert. A couple brought in an elderly woman claiming she was having complications from cancer treatment. The attending physician was suspicious of their story and the medications they said she was taking. Tears of relief streamed down my face. Can I see her? We're arranging transport now. She's being airlifted to Baton Rouge General. She's very weak, but the doctors are optimistic. And Heather? Greg. In custody. They tried to flee when hospital security approached, but didn't get far. For hours later, I stood outside the ICU room where Mom was being treated. Through the window, I could see her tiny form connected to various machines, medical staff moving efficiently around her. Dr. Jenkins, the same doctor who had treated me at the shelter, approached with a tablet in hand. Your mother has been systematically poisoned, he confirmed, his expression grave. Not with chemotherapy drugs as they led her to believe, but with a combination of medications that mimic cancer symptoms, hair loss, nausea, weakness, weight loss. Most concerning was a heavy metal compound that was causing organ damage. Will she recover? I asked, barely able to form the words. With proper treatment, yes. She's malnourished and her liver and kidneys have sustained damage, but not beyond repair. We've started chelation therapy to remove the heavy metals from her system. The most important thing now is supportive care, good nutrition, hydration, and rest. Does she know about what Heather did? Dr. Jenkins shook his head. We thought it best to wait until you were here. She's been asking for both her daughters. When I was finally allowed into the room, Mom was awake but groggy. Her face brightened when she saw me. "Cassie," she whispered, her voice raspy. "You're okay. They told me you were caught in the flood." I took her frail hand in mine, careful not to disturb the 4 lines. "I was, but I'm fine now." "How are you feeling?" "Better, strangely. The doctors here say my treatment wasn't right." Confusion clouded her features. "Where's Heather? And Greg? They were taking such good care of me." I exchanged glances with Dr. Jenkins, who nodded encouragingly. "Mom," I began gently, "there's something I need to tell you. It's going to be hard to hear, but you need to know the truth." Over the next hour, with frequent breaks when it became too overwhelming, I explained everything: the counterfeit drug operation, the poisoning, the insurance policies, and finally, how Heather had left me to die in the flooding basement. Mom's reaction cycled from disbelief to horror to devastating grief. "Not my Heather," she kept saying. "She wouldn't do this. There must be a mistake." "I'm so sorry," I said, holding her as she wept. "I wish it wasn't true." Later, when Mom had been sedated to help her rest, I met with Detective Patterson and the FBI agent assigned to the case, Michael Thompson. They had set up in a small conference room in the hospital. "We found everything exactly where you said it would be," Agent Thompson confirmed. "Once the floodwaters receded enough to access the basement, our evidence recovery team was able to salvage most of the operation: pill presses, chemical compounds, packaging materials, shipping records. Your sister and brother-in-law were running a sophisticated counterfeit drug ring, distributing fake medications throughout the Southeast. The scope is larger than we initially thought," Detective Patterson added. "We've identified at least 17 elderly victims in 3 states who were receiving these counterfeit medications. Some were being deliberately poisoned like your mother, while others simply received ineffective treatments for actual conditions." "And the insurance fraud?" "Extensive," Agent Thompson said. "In addition to your mother, they had set up similar scenarios with at least 3 other elderly individuals, all patients at the pharmacy where your sister worked. In each case, Greg used his position as a pharmaceutical sales representative to gain their trust, while Heather handled the medication substitution." "What about Dad's insurance money?" I asked. "Heather was convinced Mom spent it all on my college education." Detective Patterson consulted her notes. "We looked into that. Your father did have a life insurance policy, but the beneficiary was your mother, not you or Heather directly. According to financial records, your mother used approximately half the money to pay off the mortgage on your family home. The rest was divided equally into 2 trust funds, one for each daughter, to be accessed at age 25. "But I never received any trust fund," I said, confused. "You wouldn't have known about it yet," she explained. "You're 27 now, but according to the bank, the notification letters were returned as undeliverable when you turned 25. You had moved to California and apparently didn't leave a forwarding address." "And Heather's fund?" "She received hers 2 years ago. Approximately $25,000. She spent it within 3 months, mostly on a new car and a cruise." The revelation stunned me. All this time, Heather had believed she'd been cheated, when in reality, Mom had been perfectly fair. The trust fund she never mentioned to me had been waiting all along. "There's more," Agent Thompson said. "We've been interviewing residents at the senior living facility where several victims lived. Apparently, your sister and her husband were well known there. They organized weekly bingo nights, delivered medications, helped with errands, all while identifying potential targets. The systematic nature of their operation made me physically ill. What had started as a bitter young woman's resentment had evolved into a calculating criminal enterprise built on the suffering of the most vulnerable." "What happens now?" I asked. "They're being held without bail," Detective Patterson said. "The charges are substantial: attempted murder, fraud, manufacturing and distributing counterfeit pharmaceuticals, false imprisonment, elder abuse, and more. They're looking at decades in prison." I should have felt relief, but all I felt was a profound sadness. The sister I had grown up with, fought with, loved despite everything, she was gone, replaced by someone capable of unimaginable cruelty. And Mom, once she fully comprehended what had happened, would never be the same. As I walked back toward the ICU, I paused outside Mom's room. She was sleeping peacefully now, the harsh lines of pain that had marked her face beginning to soften as the poisons left her system. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be returning to California anytime soon. Mom would need me now more than ever. And perhaps, in caring for her, I might find a way to heal the wounds that Heather had inflicted on us both. 6 months after the flood that nearly claimed my life, Mom and I sat on the porch of our new home, a modest bungalow in a quiet neighborhood 50 miles from St. Elaine. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Mom rocked gently in her chair, a quilt draped over her legs despite the mild temperature. "Dr. Barnes says my kidney function is almost back to normal," she said, smiling. "Apparently. I'm exceeding all his expectations." I reached over to squeeze her hand. "That's because he doesn't know how stubborn Miller women are." Her recovery had been remarkable by any standard. Once freed from the cocktail of poisons Heather and Greg had been administering, Mom's health had improved steadily. Her hair was growing back, silver now instead of the auburn I remembered, and she had regained most of the weight she'd lost. The lingering effects of the poisoning would require ongoing monitoring. But the worst was behind us. The psychological healing had been slower. Mom had initially refused to believe the full extent of Heather's betrayal, insisting there must have been some misunderstanding or that Greg had coerced her. The denial had crumbled during Heather's preliminary hearing, where the evidence was laid out in excruciating detail, including recorded jail phone calls in which Heather expressed regret only that their plan had failed. That day in court had been particularly difficult. Sitting behind the prosecution table, I had watched my sister enter in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, her face devoid of emotion even when she spotted Mom and me. Throughout the proceedings, she stared straight ahead, never once meeting our eyes. Today marked another milestone in our journey, the culmination of the criminal case against Heather and Greg. After months of legal maneuvering, they had both accepted plea deals rather than face trial. The terms were substantial: 30 years for Greg, 25 for Heather, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. The prosecutor called, I told Mom, pulling myself back to the present. The judge accepted the plea agreements this morning. It's officially over. Mom nodded slowly. I still see her as a little girl sometimes, you know. Following you around the yard with her favorite doll, trying to do everything just like her big sister did. Her voice caught. Where did I go wrong, Cassie? You didn't, I said firmly, a conversation we'd had many times with her therapist. Heather made her choices. Adult choices with devastating consequences. In the months since the flood, the full scope of Heather and Greg's operation had been uncovered. Their counterfeit drug ring had victimized dozens of elderly patients across 3 states. 3 had died as a direct result of receiving fake medications. Countless others had suffered needlessly as their health conditions worsened without proper treatment. Beyond the human cost, the financial fraud had been extensive. Insurance policies, forged prescriptions, stolen retirement funds. The couple had amassed nearly $500,000 through their schemes. Most of their victims had been patients at the pharmacy where Heather worked or residents of the assisted living facilities on Greg's sales route. I spoke with Detective Patterson yesterday. I continued, pouring more tea into Mom's cup. The Victim Restitution Fund has been established. It won't undo the harm they caused, but it will help with medical expenses for those affected. The investigation had led to systemic changes as well. The State Board of Pharmacy had implemented new verification protocols for critical medications. The hospital where Mom had supposedly received her cancer diagnosis had overhauled their record-keeping systems after discovering how easily Heather and Greg had forged documentation. For our part, Mom and I had established a new normal. I had taken an extended leave from my environmental consulting job, eventually arranging to work remotely on projects that didn't require field work. We had sold the flood-damaged family home for the land value once it was declared structurally unsound, using the proceeds and Mom's portion of the restitution fund to purchase our new house. Most importantly, we had each other. Our relationship, always close, but tempered by distance and life circumstances, had deepened through our shared trauma and recovery. We had learned to talk about difficult things: Dad's death, the misunderstandings about the trust funds, the years of manipulation by Heather that had affected us both in different ways. "I've been thinking," Mom said, interrupting my thoughts, "about forgiveness." I tensed slightly. This was new territory. "What about it?" Dr. Morales says that forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of anger and resentment. She paused. "I'm not there yet. I don't know if I ever will be, but I'd like to try someday." I nodded, understanding. "For what it's worth, I think Dad would be proud of you for even considering it." She smiled sadly. "He always did say I had more heart than sense." After a moment, she added, "What about you, Cassie? Could you ever forgive her?" The question caught me off guard. Could I forgive the sister who had poisoned our mother, who had locked me in a flooding basement and left me to die? The easy answer was no. But the truth, as always, was more complicated. "I think," I said carefully, "that I can forgive the little girl who felt overlooked and unloved, who believed she'd been cheated out of her fair share. I can even understand how that hurt calcified into something harder and more dangerous over time." I took a deep breath. But the woman who deliberately caused so much suffering? Who is willing to sacrifice both of us for money? I don't know if forgiveness is possible there, or even appropriate. Mom nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood children play across the street, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. "Life goes on, doesn't it?" Mom said finally. "Despite everything." "It does," I agreed. "And we go on with it." In the months since the flood, I had learned painful lessons about family, that blood ties don't guarantee love or loyalty, that sometimes the people who should protect you can become your greatest threat. But I'd also discovered the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity to begin again after unimaginable loss, and the healing power of truth, however painful. Our story wasn't one with a perfect happy ending. Mom would always carry the physical and emotional scars of Heather's betrayal. I still woke sometimes in the night, gasping for breath, convinced I was back in that flooding basement. And somewhere, in a women's correctional facility, my sister was beginning her 25-year sentence, perhaps reflecting on the choices that had led her there. But we were alive. We were together. And day by day, we were reclaiming our lives and building something new from the wreckage of what had been destroyed. "I've been thinking about going back to school," Mom said suddenly. "Maybe nursing again. Or perhaps something completely different." "It's not too late, is it?" I smiled, feeling a surge of pride and love for this remarkable woman who had endured so much yet still looked toward the future with hope. "It's never too late to start over," I told her. "Never too late to become who you were always meant to be." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our new front yard, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for months. The journey of healing wasn't over, perhaps it never truly would be, but we were on the path, moving forward together. What about you? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal or loss? How did you find the strength to begin again? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this account of our journey has touched you in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with others who might need to hear that survival is possible even in the darkest circumstances. Thank you for bearing witness to our story, and may you find hope and healing in your own.